Bundestag will hold his opening speech. So let's start with a roll call. I'm going to call out each and every delegation's name, and if that delegation is present, you're going to raise your digital hand. You're going to do that by clicking either on the three dots in Microsoft Teams and then on the raise hands emoji, or on the smiley face next to the hand and then on the raise hands emoji. Please let your hand raised for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then please lower your hands again. You do that the same way you raised it. So we're going to start with the Delegation of Algeria. Okay, thank you. Argentina. Armenia. Armenia. Australia. Bahamas. Bangladesh. Bangladesh. It looks like the delegation of Bangladesh is not present. Oh, it is. Okay. Bangladesh present. Belarus. Belgium. Bolivia. Botswana. Brazil. Brunei Darussalam. Bulgaria. Cambodia. Canada. Chile. China. Congo. Congo. Delegation of Congo. Okay, it looks like the delegation of Congo is not present. Costa Rica. Cuba. Czech Republic. Czech Republic. Delegation of the Czech Republic, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like the delegation of the Czech Republic isn't present as well. Denmark. Ecuador. Egypt. Equatorial Guinea. Eritrea. Estonia. Ethiopia. Finland. France. Germany. Guatemala. India. Indonesia, Iran, Ireland, Israel, Jamaica, Japan, Kazakhstan, Looks like Kazakhstan is not present. Kenya, Delegation of Kenya. Okay, it looks like the Delegation of Kenya is not present. Lao People's Democratic Republic. Also, oh, it's present. Thank you. Latvia. Libya. Luxembourg. Malaysia. Mauritania, Delegation of Mauritania, Mexico, Myanmar, Namibia, Nepal, Netherlands, New Zealand, Niger, Norway, Panama, Papua New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, Poland, Delegation of Poland. Looks like the Delegation of Poland is not present. Portugal, Republic of Korea, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, Singapore, South Africa, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Sweden, the delegation of Sweden. Looks like the delegation of Sweden is not present. Switzerland, Thailand, Timor-Leste, Tunisia, Turkey, Turkmenistan, United Kingdom, United States of America, Uzbekistan, Venezuela, Vietnam, Zimbabwe, Greenpeace, the NGO Greenpeace. Looks like Greenpeace is not present. And NGO Reporters Without Borders. Okay, thank you very much. Now going to proceed with the opening speech of our Secretary General, Annette Zuhorst. You now have the floor.
Most Honorable Presidency, most distinguished delegates, distinguished MEN directors, dear guests. I am glad to be standing before you today as the Secretary General of the Oldenburg Model United Nations Conference 2021. It has been 2 years since the last opening ceremony of OLMUN, and we still mark our 20th international session. I am happy to greet so many of you to our first online edition, despite being in the midst of one of the worst crises our generation had to face. In the constant shadow of the worldwide pandemic, all of us had to adapt. Ever since the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus outbreak a pandemic in March 2020, we found our world changing rapidly. Schools closed, events were cancelled, people were urged to stay at home, avoid unnecessary contact, and wear face coverings in public. Even after 16 months, the perilous pandemic still evolves dynamically and still holds us in its grasp, millions of people dying or suffering from it long term. In those times, it is hard not to lose one's perspective. Despite the constant evolvement of the pandemic, we also find ourselves utterly paralyzed. How can we, when we are so isolated and separated, work together to tackle the problems that are veiled behind the constant threat of the pandemic? Problems which do not stop because we have, and which even worsen due to the attention currently cast elsewhere. How do we not lose the light that guides us to better times? We adapt. In order to maintain a perspective and be progressive in spite of a standstill, we constantly have to change our view and find new ways. Progress and perspective. We might as well add perseverance to it. More now than ever is it important to be part of progress, to work together, not to lose the spark of willingness to actively engage. Progress can be frightening at times, because it means to step outside the boundaries that we know so far, cross borders, and tear in walls that we view as safety. It is taking one step after the other to reach a better, a brighter future. It might seem hard to keep your perspective in this chaos we are facing. Though it might currently seem like it, our future life is not only determined by the ongoing pandemic. There are other crises that are corroding the pillars of our society. In a spiral of discrimination and racism, inequality and injustice, poverty and hunger, one could easily be absorbed by darkness. It is up to us to make efforts for a brighter future. As dark as it may have seemed in the recent past, there's change, igniting hope. We are not frozen in time. The world is constantly developing, changing, adapting our challenges as well as our attempts to improve it. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, the United Nations have changed their way of convening and voting, fought against misinformation, and urged for a global ceasefire. They were a beacon for all of us, which has been their task ever since they were founded in 1945. 76 years ago, their foundation can be considered as an act of desperation after humankind emerged from the Second World War with a distraught view on the past as well as the future. In order to ensure dignity and human rights for all, they were willing to form a unity, and only together did they move forward these past decades. Their progress is mostly slow-pacing, with only some success stories that come to mind, but the process of decision-making is never easy with multiple perspectives to consider. It is an advantage to evaluate certain ideas and find goals that everybody wants to achieve. In the end, there is only one world, and we have to be united in order to maintain it and to make it living worthwhile. Thus, all of us have to be dedicated to make these decisions. From desperation to dedication, we will continue to strive for the agreed-upon goals. The United Nations were in a unique position to look at the world from a perspective, and like any other nation when the COVID-19 pandemic emerged. They are now in a position to help developing countries with vaccination programs. In these trying times, we can be glad to have an organization looking out for all people, short-term and long-term. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "As we remember so many lives lost, let us never forget that our future rests on solidarity, as people united and as United Nations." It is self-evident that all of us adjusted their perspectives and kept finding progressive solutions to the ever-new turns of the pandemic. Reacting to it is new terrain, and meeting dead ends and blind alleys belongs to the process just as miraculous work and developments. It is also self-evident that most solutions are easier to find together. Imagine being a flashlight in the dark. With all our efforts combined, we will be able to light the dark and take united steps towards a brighter future. I hereby declare the 20th International Session of the Oldenburg Model United Nations Conference for officially opened. The floor is yielded back to the Presidency.
We're going to continue with the first set of opening speeches delivered by delegations. Some delegations prepared opening speeches. They are around 45 seconds to 1 minute long. After the set of opening speeches, you'll have the rights of reply, so you delegations can ask questions. Delegation of China, you have the floor. Delegation of China, you now have the floor to deliver your opening speech. Please unmute yourself and start to deliver your speech. We can see you. Okay, I think then we're going to switch the opening speeches and let the second delegation begin. Delegation of Malaysia, you now have the floor to deliver your opening speech. Please unmute yourself and okay, thank you for your speech. I now yield the floor to the one delegation that did not deliver its opening speech yet. So the other delegation can now deliver their speech. Thank you very much. 3 delegations have now the possibility to use the right of reply. Any delegations wanting to obtain the right of reply, please raise your digital hand now. Again, are there any delegations that are wanting to use their rights of reply? As it seems this is not the case, we're going to proceed with our OLMUN opening the OLMUN Morning Show.
Welcome to the Oldenburg Model United Nations 2021, and welcome to our first episode of the OLMUN Morning Show on the official OLMUN TV channel. My name is Johanna Breen, and I am the host of the show. Welcome! The OLMUN 2021 is starting today, and we want to introduce you to everything you need to know about this year's conference. In the news, we will tell you everything important about the days at the OLMUN. There will be a new episode of the OLMUN Morning Show published on the official OLMUN TV YouTube channel each morning. The newest episodes will be shown in the committee sessions and in the opening ceremony on Tuesday, as well as in the closing ceremony on Friday. The OLMUN 2020 had to be cancelled due to COVID-19, and instead a small online conference, the OLMUN at Home, was held. We want to thank all the delegates of our first digital OLMUN once again for their participation and effort. This year's conference is still very different from how the conference has been in the past years, since the preparations and the proceedings at the conference continue to be influenced by the pandemic. A lot of change had to be made. The OLMUN 2021 offers 2 in-person committees for delegates participating from Oldenburg. Delegates from all over the world can take part in the online committees. All evening activities will take place online as well. The general process of the conference is still the same, but we will inform you about all change you must know about. In every morning show, we will review the past day of the OLMUN conference and will present you some nice shots of the day, combined with some interviews and maybe some funny punishments. Afterwards, we will guide you through the timetable, so you know what is happening at the OLMUN every day. Before we do that today, you will get to know the students responsible for organizing the OLMUN. The Secretariat and the Inner Circle are preparing and executing the OLMUN every year. Due to COVID-19, they couldn't pursue their tasks as usual. Every meeting had to be held online, and the preparations were even more difficult. The whole team has worked hard to make an in-person conference possible, even despite COVID-19. As you can see, it worked out well, and everyone is happy that the OLMUN 2021 can take place. The secretariats consist of the Secretary General, Anne Zerhorst, and her deputy, Hendrik Ebel, who are responsible for the general organization of the OLMUN conference. President of the General Assembly, Tristan Leoluca Farinella, and his deputy, Caroline Renz, are responsible for the proceedings throughout the week and will lead the discussions. Treasurer, Joanna Grave, is helping the team to prepare the OLMUN. They are assisted by a group of around 20 students, the Inner Circle. In this picture, you can see the students of the Inner Circle. Now, we will lead you through today's timetable. Since we are at the opening ceremony right now, most of the work for today is done. You have passed the registration and took part in the introduction. The opening ceremony will last until approximately 4:30 p.m. Unlike the past years, our evening activities will be held online. Tonight, there will be a quiz night, which starts at 7 p.m. We hope to see all delegates taking part and getting to know each other, no matter whether they normally participate in person or online. You don't have to be in dress code for the evening activities. We want to give you a little sneak peek of our last evening activity on Thursday. There will be a show night, and we want to encourage all delegates to send in videos showing talents, funny videos of you or maybe your pet, or just anything entertaining that comes to your mind. You can get creative for your entry. We are relying on you for a great and entertaining show. For more information, you can check our website olmun.org, your survival pack, or download the official OLMUN app. There you will find everything you need to know and the latest updates. Make sure to download the app, which is available in the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. New this year is our OLMUN blog, where you can find articles about the proceedings at the conference and in the committees, interviews with delegates and the team behind the OLMUN, as well as breaking news. You can read the blog on www.digitaldiplomat.org and subscribe for updates. Please make sure to also subscribe to our YouTube channel, OLMUN TV, and follow every episode of our morning show. Thank you for watching and have a great start into the OLMUN.
We're now going to continue with another set of opening speeches delivered by delegations. Up next, the opening speech of the Delegation of Japan. You now have the floor.
Most intelligent species, yet we are destroying our home. Now is the time to take accountability, to save what is left. Let's make an effort as a unit, recycling, reducing and minimizing waste. Let's be kind and thoughtful and considerate for a brighter future. Arigato gozaimasu. Thank you. I yield the floor back.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, the delegation of Brazil has the floor for delivering their opening speech. Can you please unmute yourself, Brazil? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Could you
Okay.
maybe enable the camera?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Dear Mr. President, honorable delegates, Brazil is a proud country with Christian and conservative values at its foundation. Due to those values, we condemn doubts about our sovereignty and any offers which would weaken those. Brazil sees joblessness and the results of the pandemic as the most important issues. To solve them, it is necessary to face them simultaneously. One way to do this is by supporting open markets and new policies to ensure new market systems. Human rights, rights of stateless people, women rights, and the outer space are one of our most important topics. All topics are of top priority. The Republic of Brazil is open for negotiations when liberal and conservative values build the foundation on which we discuss. Kudos, ambeso, todos nos. Thank you, and I give the floor back.
Thank you. Now, the delegation of Nepal has the floor for delivering their opening speech.
Thank you. Your Excellency, the Secretary General, esteemed President, honorable chairs, and fellow delegates. As the delegation of Nepal and as a member of the Human Rights Committee, we are so honored to be in such a conference representing such a position. As it's known already, our agenda item is contracting the violation of human rights by law enforcement agencies. Due to human rights violations, many people experience various health problems and sometimes even death. This is strongly condemned in Nepal, but unfortunately this problem is encountered in Nepal as well as in every country. With that being said, Nepal is ready to do everything in its power to solve this problem. Thank you. We yield the floor.
Thank you very much. Again, 3 delegations have the possibility to use the right of reply. Any delegation wanting to obtain the right of reply, please raise the digital hand. As this is not the case, we're going to proceed with our first guest speaker, Mr. David McAllister, Member of the European Parliament. Mr. McAllister, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me to the 20th session of the Oldenburg Model United Nations Conference, and best regards from the European Parliament in Brussels. Since my hometown isn't far away from Oldenburg, it's a real pleasure for me to address your conference, which has distinguished itself as the largest Model United Nations in Germany, welcoming more than 700 delegates each year. I have been following the development of this conference, and my impression is that since the first conference in 2001, the Oldenburg edition of the Model United Nations has continuously evolved to become more and more professional. So first of all, let me thank the organizers who put a lot of work and efforts into this very valuable project. It's not only a good way to learn more about the United Nations and international politics, but also an opportunity to meet new people from all over the world. Now, as I have already heard while following the introductory statements, the topic of this year's conference is Progress and Perspective, United Efforts for a Brighter Future. I understand it is supposed to symbolize a new beginning in international relations and global cooperation after the COVID-19 pandemic. This title is very well chosen. The just re-elected Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who I know and I appreciate very much his excellent work in New York, put it this way at the beginning of this year, quote, 2020 brought us tragedy and peril. 2021 must be the year to change gear and put the world on track. We need to move from death to health, from disaster to reconstruction, from despair to hope, from business as usual to transformation. We can move from an annus horribilis to make this an annus possibilitatis, a year of possibility and hope, unquote. And indeed, the Secretary General is right. This year can indeed be a turning point regarding international cooperation. Now is the time to translate the words of President Guterres, of Secretary General Guterres, into action. 3 topics are of particular importance in this regard. First, fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, cooperating internationally to defeat climate change. And thirdly, strengthening multilateralism to ensure peace and security on Earth. As Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the European Parliament, allow me to briefly address these 3 issues from a European Union's perspective. The first point, fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. You are all aware that our world has changed profoundly in the past year. The pandemic has taken a tragic toll in human lives and suffering. This pandemic has not only created unprecedented challenges in our daily lives, but also in global socio-economic trends and international politics. It has, in the end, amplified some existing tendencies, caused disturbances in others, and above all, ignited new challenges to which we will be seeking answers for many years to come. The scale of the global health crisis and varied responses to it has been unprecedented in the history of modern mankind. We were profoundly aware of sudden silence on the streets caused by protracting lockdowns, shortages brought by distortions in supply chains, its impact on businesses and daily lives, all within the first months as the virus meandered from one part of the globe to the other. This pandemic imposed a heavy burden on individuals, on societies, and placed severe strains on our economies and healthcare systems. In addition to the significant social impacts on the human dimension, the coronavirus outbreak was a major economic shock, not only to us in the European Union, but also to, I would say, more or less all countries in the world. Apart from the disruption on global supply chains, volatile financial markets, consumer demand shocks, and negative impact in key sectors just as travel and tourism, for instance, European stock markets folded in March 2020 by approximately 30% compared to just a month before, the sharpest monthly decline since the world financial crisis in 2008. Now vaccinating represents a clear way out of the pandemic. It is obvious that the COVID-19 pandemic will not be under control anywhere until it is under control everywhere. In an interconnected world, global health and health security threats respect no borders at all. Therefore, vaccines need to be available and affordable to all. This is not only a matter of fairness and justice, but it's also a question of efficiency. There is simply no way to defeat a virus that spreads in developing countries like wildfires and afterwards continues to mutate. For this reason, the G7 countries committed during their summit on the 13th of June in Cornwall to share up to 1 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines with the aim to deliver at least half by the end of 2021. This is a first important step, but further steps need to follow, that is sure. Now, concrete cooperation with the private sector, the G20, and other countries is required to further increase the contributions over the months to come. I also welcome that the G7 reaffirmed their support for COVAX as the primary route for providing vaccines to the poorest countries. The European Union is investing in COVAX both financially and by sharing vaccines. Why? Because we are convinced that this is the best way to ensure fair and affordable access to COVID-19 vaccines worldwide. Global cooperation is key. And let's not forget that for each vaccine, there are probably more than 100 components produced in different parts of the world. My second remark, cooperating internationally to defeat climate change. We are in a situation in the world where the average temperature rise in relation to pre-industrial levels is already 1.2 degrees Celsius, very close to the 1.5 degrees that the international scientific community tells us is the limit to avoid catastrophic developments in the world. Three fundamental priorities should lead us. Creating a global coalition for net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by the middle of this century. Building resilience of communities and societies, the so-called adaptation that has been, to a certain extent, I would call it the forgotten part of the international support to climate action. And finally, supporting developing countries financially so that they are ambitious also in their own targets, making them able to address the huge challenges that people are already facing due to the impacts of climate change. The European Union is the global leader in the fight against climate change. We are determined to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050, the latest. Europe is clearly leading the way, but we are happy to see others joining our course. South Africa, South Korea, Japan, just to name a few major economies. They are all embarking on their way to a net zero future. It is particularly encouraging that the United States, with the new president, Mr. Joe Biden, has returned to the commitments under the Paris Agreement. You may have followed that in Cornwall, the G7 made an ambitious commitment all G7 members agreed net zero no later than 2050, halving the collective emissions over the 2 decades to 2030, increasing and improving climate finance to 2025, and to conserve or protect at least 30% of our land and oceans by 2030. But you, as the younger generation, correctly expect that these commitments now have to be backed up by real action and measurable targets. Only what can be measured is done. In the European Union, we have just agreed to engrave our commitments in Europe's first ever climate law. In addition, the European Commission will present in the next few weeks a longer series of legislative proposals before the summer break in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% till 2013. We call this huge package Fit for 55. So to sum up, climate change is a global challenge. We can only tackle this together. And my third and final point is about strengthening multilateralism to ensure peace and security. The nature of conflict and violence has transformed substantially since the United Nations were founded, or was founded 75 years ago. Conflicts now might tend to be less deadly and often waged between domestic groups rather than states. However, homicides are becoming more frequent in some parts of the world, while gender-based attacks are also increasing globally. The long-term impact on development of interpersonal violence, including violence against children, is also more widely recognized. Technological advances have raised concerns about lethal autonomous weapons and cyber attacks, the weaponization of bots and drones, and the live streaming of extremist attacks. There has also been a rise in criminal activity involving data hacks and ransomware, for example. Meanwhile, international cooperation is under strain, diminishing global potential for the prevention and the resolution of conflict and violence in all forms. I have occasionally described this pandemic as a wake-up call for multilateralism and a real chance to push for much-needed reforms on international cooperation. The United Nations plays a key role in this regard. The United Nations has proved to be an essential universal forum for international consensus building on peace and security, sustainable development, and respect for human rights and international law. Just 2 weeks ago, here in the European Parliament, we adopted our recommendations to the Council concerning the 75th and the 76th sessions of the United Nations General Assembly. In our recommendation, we made very clear that the COVID-19 pandemic has shown the urgent need for resilient capacity building throughout the international community and the need for close multilateral dialogue on cooperation. On our role as European Union, we highlighted that, quote, in a multipolar context where some countries are promoting selective multilateralism rather than effective multilateralism anchored in universal values, the European Union must seek to promote further and unconditional commitment by United Nations members to universal values, unquote. We call for a reform of the United Nations, in particular the Security Council. We believe we should limit the use of the right to veto, notably in cases of war crimes and crimes against humanity. We believe changing the members' composition of the Security Council would better reflect today's world. And we believe that creating a permanent seat for the European Union could be of real added value. You all know that the European Union is a soft power when it comes to foreign affairs. We are a partner of choice for many countries in the world. We are by far the largest donor of development assistance with around 70 billion euros annually, and we are together with like-minded partners, strong advocates of promoting democracy, protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms. However, we need to now further develop our common foreign and security policy in order to strategically tackle all the different threats, systemic competition from assertive and authoritarian powers, as well as growing security challenges to our countries and our citizens from all strategic directions. So to conclude, I'm always thrilled when young people are enthusiastic and engaged in global issues. Together, it is you that represent cooperation as it should be. People from different countries coming together to find solutions to challenges through constructive debate and an exchange of ideas. Your model United Nations is built on open minds, and it is built on fresh ideas. Many of you have been asked to represent national agendas or stands that you may personally disagree with. You will do so fairly, and on the other hand, forcefully. This open-mindedness is the essence of successful diplomacy. The ability to understand and the ability to analyze all positions, including those that you oppose. So respecting each other's positions is key to resolve global challenges. This principle is not only valid for the highest political stages, but also in everybody's day-to-day life. Thank you all for your commitment. I'm looking forward to a brief discussion, and I wish you all a great conference. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much for your speech and enriching our conference. So now every delegation has the possibility to ask questions. Any delegation wishing to ask a question may raise their hand. Botswana, you now have the floor to ask a question.
Distinguished Presidency, dear Mr. McAllister, the delegation of Botswana would hear that you also talked about human rights and law, and also about supporting developing countries financially. The delegation of Botswana will talk about in the special conference about the protection of stateless people by saving their human rights. So the question of the delegation is, what's your opinion? What does the United Nations have to do? And also what can Europe do to solve that problem? Thank you.
Thank you, Botswana, for this question. Great country you're representing. Let me first of all say that the European Union wants to take the level of our cooperation with the African Union to a new level. Unfortunately, this year's planned EU-European Union, African Union Summit couldn't take place yet. We're hoping to organize it in the second half. Why am I saying this? Because I strongly believe that our two continents, Europe and Africa, are so closely interlinked, and that our fate in Europe depends on the further development of our neighboring continent, Africa, and many of the difficulties Africa is facing in general, of course, goes back to a situation that 200-300 years ago, Europeans came to Africa. They were never invited. They exploited your great continent for far too long, and afterwards they organized their farewell and their retreat without really organizing a proper, decent handover. So there's also a responsibility. But the new European Union approach towards Africa is that we want to have a relationship at eye level, and that's why I never talk about a new Marshall Plan for Africa. I talk about a new Marshall Plan with Africa, because we are negotiating and partnership representatives on both sides at eye level. Now to your question. Global rights include human rights. human rights should apply to all human beings on the world. And we in the European Union, together with like-minded partners like the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, South Africa, many Latin American countries, India, we are fighting for global rights. We are fighting for protecting human dignity. We are actively campaigning for democracy, for gender equality, just to name some of our values and principles. Unfortunately, there are other countries in the world who take a different approach towards human rights.
Yeah.
What we can do as European Union is, because we can't choose our partners, there are 193 members of the United Nations, so there are at least 193 countries in the world, and they're not all like us. We need to interact with them all, but we have to be very clear, the more you subscribe to our values and principles, and I would say they're not our values and principles, they are global values and principles, the more benefit you will have. So I am very much in favor of a more for more and less for less approach. This also includes the European Union's position on development cooperation. Those countries who are open for reforms and strengthening democracy and the rule of law, they should be supported more than other countries who go a different way, trying to oppress their people. I strongly believe, final sentence, in the long run, history has shown this, the will of achieving freedom and liberty will, in the end, succeed. We saw this after the great changes in 1989, 1990, in the former Warsaw Pact and a communist era of the world. There's quite some noise in the background, that's for sure.
Thank you very much, and I'm really sorry for the technical problems. Now, the delegation of China wanted to ask a question, so you now have the floor, China.
Yeah, first of all, Mr. McAllister, thank you a lot for your speech. As a delegate of the People's Republic of China, I have to ask whether, in your opinion, China's efforts in the fight against climate change are sufficient or not?
Well, the leadership of the People's Republic of China have announced that they want to achieve climate neutrality by 2060. That is 10 years later than in the European Union. Of course, we would welcome that China would be even more ambitious, sure. But we are in a constant dialogue with China on this issue because in the end, we can climate change at a global level. We need all countries on board, the United States, India, Brazil, Russia, but also, and of course, the world's second largest and strongest economy, China. So to answer your question, China is on the right track in this field. However, I would like to see China be more ambitious, but we have to accept the decision of the Chinese Communist leadership. Mr. President, you need to unmute.
Oh, I'm sorry. We've got another question, thank you, from the Delegation of Indonesia. So you now have the floor.
First of all, I would like to say thank you for your magnificent speech. And I would like to ask, maybe you have some advice. How can we, as students, influence the problem of global warming and climate change? And yeah, how can we influence this as students?
Well, I'll give you a personal answer on this one. My wife and I, we both have two daughters, aged 15 and 16, and I have faced in our family, just like millions of others in Europe and throughout the whole world, what major impact your generation has had. Let's be very clear, it was your generation that has put the agenda to tackle climate change on the table, and not only in Germany, not only in the member states of the European Union, but also in other countries from the United Kingdom to the United States, Canada, Japan. So all over the free Western democratic world, we are debating this issue now, and you have already had a big impact. And now what I would advise you is, since the issue of climate change has now reached all serious political parties, at least I can say that as regards to Germany, now that we are no longer debating the if, but we are debating the how to achieve our ambitious climate targets. You should continue not only to follow the debate, but also to get engaged actively. And at least for all those German participants of this conference, I would advise you follow the election campaign in Germany very closely. The elections are taking place on the 26th of September. Have a close look at the party manifestos. Ask your candidates in your local constituencies what they are concretely going to do to tackle this. In the end, I'm very sure that those political forces will succeed to find an answer to, on the one hand, achieving our ambitious climate targets in Germany and in Europe, and on the other hand, making sure that all people will be able to afford this ambitious climate policy, and how we can achieve this without endangering the competitiveness of our businesses, especially our industry. And we also will have to do something. We have to once again make very clear that climate change cannot only be tackled in Europe on its own, or in Northern America on its own, or in other parts of the world. We are all in this together, and that's why I sincerely hope that the next climate conference, the COP26 in Glasgow, will be a success. Something which I already mentioned is, it is encouraging that the United States are back on track. I always said it was very unfortunate that under the Trump administration, the United States were leaving multilateral and international organizations. The United States should also always be leading international organizations, but not understood as unique US leadership and all others have to follow, but in the sense of a cooperative, collaborative leadership approach. And I sincerely hope that President Biden and his administration will be a valuable contributor to a better American climate policy than what we had seen since 2017 under President Trump.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We've got another question from a delegation, which country I cannot see. Her name is Cosima Bolinius. You now have the floor.
Yes, I am part of the Filipino delegation, and I wanted to ask a question from the perspective of my country, and considering that I am part of the Human Rights Council. You talked about adapting values. Do you see that to countries like mine, it could be a certain a certain threat in the idea of assimilating to ideals of nations which have colonized the countries in the past. And I also wanted to talk about, do you see the danger of a certain weaponization of not the values themselves, but the concept of having values?
What unites us in the European Union, but also in the Western world, and I don't understand the term Western world as a geographic term, but it's a concept of mindset. What unites us is to understand that every human being is unique, and every human being has his or her very own dignity. And that is the reason why the respect of human rights is of such crucial importance. We also believe in the concept of democracy, the rule of law, pluralism, open and tolerant societies, religious freedom, gender equality. This has all developed over hundreds of years, and we strongly believe that these values and principles should apply all over the world. And these values and principles are not part of a political concept. They're not left or right. They're not liberal or conservative. They're not socialist or green. This is something which unites us and where we should all stick together. Unfortunately, a majority of people in the world are living in countries and states and regimes who are not democratic, who don't respect the rule of law, who don't allow freedom of speech and media. Yes, I would call it, European way of life, but I could also say the North American way of life, or to a certain degree Latin American way of life, or Australian way of life, Japanese way of life. But this Western way of life is increasingly under pressure. Authoritarian, assertive states have a different view, and we have to face reality, and we will always argue in favor of our concept. Values aren't a weapon. You can't weaponize values. Values is something which every man and every woman on earth should respect. That's why I welcome the new American initiative to protect human rights and fundamental freedoms across the globe. The Alliance of Democracies President Biden is talking about could be a further contribution to strengthening a rules-based global order, to strengthen multilateralism. But it's not only about forming an alliance of democracies, it's about forming an alliance for democracy, for global democracy. Two countries in the moment are very much on our mind in Europe, and we are sad that our relations are in a difficult phase. That is, on the one hand, Russia. EU, Russia, also US-Russia relations have deteriorated in the last 10 years, and they are at a record low point. I deeply regret this. I still believe that we should always follow a policy of an open hand towards Russia, trying to find communication channel, trying to cooperate where possible, but Russia simply has to change its behavior. Russia has to stop violating the integrity and the sovereignty of independent countries. Russia has to stop bullying its neighboring countries. Russia has to stop interfering in our democratic processes. And Russia has to respect human rights in Russia and outside. So unfortunately, EU-Russia, or our relations with Russia, are put to a test in the moment. And on China, just to conclude, our relationship with China is threefold. Russia is, to a certain degree, a cooperation partner. China is, to a certain degree, our cooperation partner. China is an economic competitor, but China is also a systemic rival. And that makes our relationship with China so challenging. So I would always say, and the United Nations is an important format where we Europeans come together with the Chinese, cooperate where possible, compete where needed, but also confront where necessary. Let's be very clear, the communist leadership in Beijing has a very different view on fundamental freedoms, democracy, and other values I have talked about. But, and that was my final point, because I know that you want to continue your conference, in the end, diplomacy is always about finding consensus and compromise. That can be very, very challenging, but we can be happy that we have an institution like the United Nations, formed after the catastrophe of the Second World War, because we need a format where we can come together trying to discuss how to improve this world for the benefit of the people and the environment. So if there are no further comments from your side, let me just once again say I am totally thrilled that you are organizing this conference. And if you, in your future life, are interested in working in an international organization or at a European level, I think the first steps you are making here will be very beneficial, because actually, and I have observed the activities of the United Nations myself in New York, this is actually how the United Nations operates, by the way, including all the technical difficulties which these digital conferences bring about. So your conference is just like any other conference I attend on a daily or weekly basis. So, President Farinella, thanks for inviting me, and best wishes to all Congress participants.
Thank you very much for reaching our conference, and thank you very much for your answers and your time, Mr. McAllister.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Take care. Up next, we're going to continue with our short midday break until 3 p.m. Please rejoin this meeting about 5 to 10 minutes beforehand, and then we're going to start with the next roll call. See you in 45 minutes. Delegation of Algeria, are you present? Argentina. Armenia. Australia. Bahamas. Bangladesh. Delegation of Bangladesh, are you present? Looks like the delegation of Bangladesh is not present. Belarus. Belgium. Bolivia. Botswana. Brazil.
Yes, we are present, but it's good.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Brazil.
Yes, aber es funktioniert nicht.
Can you please mute your microphone?
Wie? Hier.
Okay, Brunei Darussalam. Bulgaria. Cambodia. Canada. Chile. China. Congo. Costa Rica. Cuba. Czech Republic. The delegation of the Czech Republic. Czech Republic not present. Denmark. Ecuador. Egypt. Equatorial Guinea. Eritrea. Delegation of Estonia. Ethiopia. Finland. France. Germany. Guatemala. India. Indonesia. Iran. Ireland. Israel. Jamaica. Japan. Once again, delegation of Japan.
We are present.
Thank you very much, but please raise your digital hand. Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, Delegation of Kazakhstan, are you present? Kazakhstan not present. Kenya. Lao People's Democratic Republic. Latvia. Libya. Luxembourg. Malaysia. Mauritania. Mexico. Myanmar. Namibia. Namibia. It seems like Namibia is not present. Nepal. The Netherlands. New Zealand. Niger. Norway. Panama. Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea, are you present? Okay. The Philippines? Poland? Portugal? The Republic of Korea? Russia? Saudi Arabia? Senegal? Singapore? South Africa? St. Vincent and the Grenadines? Sweden? Switzerland? Seems like Switzerland isn't present. Thailand? The delegation of Timor-Leste? Tunisia? Turkey? Turkey? It seems that Turkey isn't present. Turkmenistan? United Kingdom? United States of America, Uzbekistan, Venezuela, Vietnam, Zimbabwe, and now Greenpeace, the NGO Greenpeace, are you present? Okay, it seems like Greenpeace isn't present. Reporters Without Borders. Seems Reporters Without Borders isn't present as well, but it seems like Australia, Brazil, and Turkey are indeed present. That's good to know. Up next, we're going to hear the opening speech of the mayor of Oldenburg, Jurgen Klopp.
Dear students, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 20th OLMUN. I want to wish everyone involved in this successful event a very happy anniversary. Congratulations to 20 years of the OLMUN. All of us would have loved to already celebrate this 20th birthday 1 year ago. But as we all know, the global coronavirus pandemic crossed these plans. Thus, we are even more delighted to come back together this year, and for the first time in a mainly digital form. The fact that we are perfectly able to interact digitally makes us very fortunate in these times of social distancing. Despite the pandemic, many guests from Oldenburg and its surroundings and from the Netherlands and Italy are virtually present. Opportunities to connect and interact are more important than ever in these challenging times. And alongside this, the ability to talk to each other, find solutions and discuss various topics together, progress and perspective, united efforts for a brighter future is the motto of this OLMUN. It highlights the core competences of the OLMUN pretty well, which consist of respectfully working towards solutions in unity and providing perspectives. To conclude, although the OLMUN 2021 had to face many new challenges, I'm sure that it will be just as enjoyable, interesting, and successful as previous conferences. Thank you for being a part of it.
Thank you very much. Even though, this was a pre-recorded message of greeting, so we don't have the possibility to ask any questions, though. So there's no right to reply. Up next, we're going to have our last set of opening speeches delivered by delegations. Starting with the United States of America, you now have the floor to deliver your opening speech.
Honorable President, by President Obama, but they still hold value today. We have gathered here to solve the problems of our time, problems that are affecting Most importantly, It will deliver a brighter future. Thank you. We yield our time back to the President.
Thank you very much. Up next, the Delegation of Australia. You now have the floor to deliver your opening speech.
Honorable chairs and distinguished delegates. Women suffered sexual and reproductive rights, gender inequality, sexual violence, and workplace discrimination. The list goes on and on and on. Even though we've accomplished great change in most countries, there's still so much left to improve. We are honored to be here today and even more honored to be in the Women's Committee. The Delegation of Australia is following the problems regarding gender inequality with great concern. We must admit that even in our wealthy, well-governed country, there's still a lot of inequality based on sex. Therefore, we urge you to understand the importance of this committee. We're looking forward to debate about these issues and hopefully to come up with a solution that can make an instant change. Thank you. We would like to yield the floor back to the presidency.
Thank you very much. Up next, the opening speech of the Delegation of Portugal. You now have the floor.
Thank you. Your Excellency, the Secretary General, esteemed President, honorable chairs and fellow delegates. As a delegate of the Portuguese Republic, we would like to state that it's a great honor to take place in this prestigious conference. We have been holding the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union since the 1st of January till the end of June 2021. And as a country that adopts a brighter future as a country policy as well, we have been working on some major priorities in this context. And these priorities had pursued along 5 lines of action, which were resilient, green, digital, social, and global Europe. We also focused on bringing the EU through the COVID-19 pandemic and lead the European Union out of the crisis. Please note that a real effort and a lot of strength will be needed, but the future might be better as long as we go for it. Thank you. We yield the floor to the President.
Thank you very much. The last opening speech delivered by a delegation for today is the Delegation of Armenia. You now have the floor. Delegation of Armenia. Okay, Armenia was present, so there shouldn't be a problem. Your Mun director wrote me an email asking if you could also deliver your speech. This is your once-in-a-lifetime chance to do so.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Dear delegates, honorable presidency, progress and perspective, these very important terms are the theme of this year's conference. Progress can be made by anyone and anything, and Armenia is no exception to this. Then, despite being plagued by heavy conflicts and even genocide in its history, Armenia managed to build its own healthy culture and economy. Perspective is what even the smallest countries should have and what gives them hope to strive for a brighter future. Big global acting countries should focus on delivering this perspective for positive development to smaller countries. And then with united global efforts, we can strive for a brighter future. The floor is yielded back to the presidency.
Thank you very much. I just got the message that Greenpeace is also present. Please mute your microphone. Thank you very much. So now the 4 delegations have the possibility to use the right of reply to ask questions. If any delegation wants to obtain that right, they can just raise the digital hand. Okay. As this is not the case, we're going to proceed with some advertisement. So, if you want to follow us around our OLMUN week, or if you want to have a closer look at what we do and how we prepare the OLMUN week, you can just follow us on social media. On Instagram and Snapchat, our username is OLMUN_official. On Twitter and Facebook, it's just OLMUN. We also have a wonderful YouTube channel that's called OLMUN TV Official. So we also got an official OLMUN app. You can download it from the Apple App Store and from the Google Play Store with more additional background information about meeting locations and interesting information about our conference in general. Up next, the last opening speech by Roderich Kiesewetter, Chair of the Parliamentary Oversight Panel of the German Bundestag. Okay, I guess we just have to wait for some minutes until he arrives. Get yourself something to drink, go to the toilet. I think you have around 3 or 4 minutes time left until he's there. Okay, welcome back to the last opening speech of our opening ceremony. We'd like to greet Roderick Kiesewetter, the chair of the Parliamentary Oversight Panel of the German Bundestag. Mr. Kiesewetter, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. I'm really pleased to be part of your conference. And first of all, I would congratulate the organizers, the pupils of Oldenburg, for this marvelous conference and event. It's a great pleasure for me to have the honor and join your opening ceremony and welcome you here in Germany. International politics is characterized by dialogue and exchange, mediation and compromise. So for you who are interested in getting a deeper understanding of international affairs, it is crucial to get a very practical understanding what that means and how to successfully negotiate collaboratively. I am pleased to speak to an audience of engaged and interested young people, and I really congratulate all of you on the opportunity to explore the challenges of leading a government and develop strategies and alliances in the international area. And we, the senior generation, are really ought to learn from you, and it's an honor for us to listen to you. Let me touch upon several aspects I deem to be decisive when discussing the changing shape of the international order. So I come to my first chapter on the threshold of a new era. We are experiencing a time where formerly valid constants of the international order are beginning to lose their validity. New systemic changes and challenges are emerging, requiring us to scrutinize old paradigms. The upcoming decade, the Roaring '20s, will be characterized by a rapid change in terms of economy, our environment, and climate, as well as technology. Our liberal and democratic constitutional order is challenged from both inside and outside. We are entering a phase of the United States relatively losing their power base, while new power bases are emerging. For example, China appears increasingly self-conscious and also more aggressive than in the past. We are facing assaults to the established security and trade structures, climate change, rapid technological developments. At the same time, Germany or the European Union are facing several hotspots in our immediate neighborhood, also caused by ourselves. Sahel zone, Middle East, Northern Africa, Eastern Ukraine, Belarus, Balkans. Is challenging us to be more self-reliant and take on more substantial efforts in the domain of foreign and security policy. My second thought, China as a touchstone for transatlantic relations, systemic changes, and to become more active ourselves. We can expect China to become our strongest long-term opponent or competitor on the character of the international order. More than any other country, Germany has benefited from the rule-based international order. Therefore, we seem to be threatened more severely if we are not successful at adapting to the changes. Germany's foreign policy is not based on power politics and dominance. I think you are well aware. But other players are acting in this way, so we need to take that into account when discussing the character of our future engagement and the character of our diplomacy. The systemic competition is challenging us to take on a more active role in shaping future rules of conduct on the international level. We are required to take on more responsibility, shape globalization actively, and be capable for world politics. Path-breaking decisions on the character of the new global order are made, for example, in the Indo-Pacific, more than in the Atlantic. Thus, it is necessary to connect ourselves more intensively to partners who share our values all over the world. Our common goal is to strengthen the rule-based order, countering the crisis of multilateralism. My third thought. We need to adapt our notion of security policy. Nowadays, international politics is shaped by new instruments of power that are used purposefully. So-called classical crises continue to exist, but they are complemented by other elements catalyzing security risks such as health, climate, cyber, trade, energy, or technological progress. We need to include these aspects into our traditional understanding of security. Two examples. Climate change has massive direct and indirect implications, not only security of supply, but also rural exodus, migration, and so on. Or coping the COVID crisis and the competition for face masks and vaccines showed new means of power and challenges. So COVID disclosed deficiencies of the multilateral crisis architecture we would have required, especially during a global pandemic. Both crises show the same dilemma. Negative consequences of a global challenge are distributed unequally. The weakest are affected the most. Pre-existing tensions and crises are exacerbated, challenging us even more towards multilateral reactions. In a globalized world, we are even more forced towards a cooperative crisis management. Unfortunately, great power competition, nationalism, and protectionism have increased, as well as organized crime or corruption. Therefore, we need to see COVID as an impulse towards solidarity and protection of the weakest, as our inherent self-interest and regard safeguarding them as a form of prevention and resilience. My fourth thought, we need to adapt to new challenges and recognize the need for taking on a fair share of engagement. Given last week's trip of US President Biden to Europe, allow me to give a few further remarks on the future of the transatlantic agenda. When Biden was elected, we examined a global sigh of relief. We are back to normality, they said. Diplomacy and dialogue are back. Everything will fall back in place again. On the one hand, we are right to be relieved to have a transatlanticist back in office. However, Biden is willing to cooperate within the framework of international organizations and the international rule-based order. But on the other hand, we cannot simply lean back and expect everything to return on the status quo ante. Biden will continue to challenge us towards intensified engagement, and he legitimately is asking us to take on a fair share. In Germany, especially in Germany, we need to recognize the need for intensified efforts. My fifth thought, there's much to repair, but we don't have much time. Why that? After Trump leaving office, Biden benefited from premature praise. At the same time, we see him determined to put his agenda into action courageously and quickly. There is much to repair after 4 years of tense relations between the US and many of their traditional partners, damages caused to international organization. We will need so far substantial dialogue. It needs to include a hands-on approach on tough matters as well. Challenges are tremendous, but the clock is ticking. We don't know who will be in office in 3.5 years. If we want to repair transatlantic relations, shape the upcoming global order, we will need to come to terms and quickly deliver substantial results. And to us Germans, we have a little bit wasted time the last 4 years with Trump. We have defined ourselves against Trump, but we have not defined how to cooperate and what should we do as Europeans and we Germans in Europe. So this waste of time we now need to compensate, and therefore also time is ticking. My sixth thought, America is back, yes, but are we all on the same page? Biden knows about the challenges he is facing. America is back, that was the message Biden orchestrated meticulously when he traveled to Europe last week. All his meetings, G7, NATO, EU summit, Russian presidency, served the superior goal to build a firm alliance countering China. But they have not spoken about climate change. They have not spoken about digitalization. they have not spoken about migration. Most important tool countering China and Russia is unity among the value-based democracies. But beside that, we should not deviate. We also need answers to the raising questions on climate change, migration, and the consequences of them. Biden knows about the power of images. However, images aren't enough if there is no substantial commitment on a renewal of engagement. My second but last thought. I call it same but different. The pivot to Asia will be long-term. Biden shares many of Trump's priorities, but is acting differently on them. What do I mean with that? Biden does by no means turn away from Trump's goals and priorities. Both Trump and Biden pursue the same strategic goal, a substantial reorientation of American foreign and security policy towards the Indo-Pacific. This is a long-term trend. However, he is acting pragmatically, nuanced, focusing on US interests at the same time. There are also implications for our bilateral relations. The United States will step back from former engagement within Europe and on Europe's borders, expecting us Europeans to show more serious efforts. So we need to be, as Germans or inside the European Union, we need to be more self-reliant and more resilient. We will continue pushing for the same demands as Trump did. Germany is in a key role. Biden is showing his willingness for compromise. Look at the Nord Stream 2 sanctions. In return, he expects us to strengthen his back both on Russia and China. In terms of trade, we are still facing the principle America first, leaving open whether a renewed attempt on a free trade agreement might be successful. The recent agreement on subventions for Airbus and Boeing is an important signal towards more cooperative relations. In summary, we are facing a broad range of challenges, but with President Biden, we are provided with a new opportunity to actively shape the global foreign and security policy, trade and climate policy. A last thought. I believe that efforts like the European Union show, for example, the European Green Deal, such efforts need to be really inclusively and not exclusively. If we want to reduce carbonized industry, to decarbonize the industry, better to say, we need also partners in this effort. And partners are also countries like Algeria or Libya or Bosnia or Kosovo, who are really dependent from coal, from gas or from oil. So we need an inclusive approach and should not bring these countries to new partners like China or Russia who would exploit them, as we already see in all international organizations inside the United Nations should strive for a common goal and should look for a comprehensive endeavor to fight climate change, migration, and other challenges. So I thank you so much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to lively debate. And please do not hesitate to ask me anything that comes up to your mind, also if I have not mentioned it. I'm expecting a really lively debate, and I wish you a successful conference. Thank you so much once again for the attention, but also for the invitation. I'm grateful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kiesewetter. So, as you already said, you now have the possibility to ask all the questions. To do so, please raise your digital hand via Microsoft Teams. China, you've been recognized. You now have the floor.
First of all, thank you for your speech. As a member of the German Parliament, do you think that it's problematic to import technology from China and that it's a problem for the national sovereignty?
Thank you for your question. We need cooperation also with China. And I think that the economic and scientific exchange is very helpful and important. Nevertheless, we have some key areas and some key technologies where we so far do not want to see a superiority of Chinese influence. For example, inside the secret services or as regards the parliamentary work, where we, with regard to 5G and technologies to come, do not want to own black boxes, which we don't really own. So yes, we need to cooperate. We are interdependent. Nevertheless, we see a strong effort of Chinese industrial espionage, a strong effort of Chinese influencing to separate some countries inside the European Union. And third, we see the human rights situation in Tibet, with the Uyghurs, with Hong Kong, and also the idea as regards Taiwan or the social control inside China. And we know about the great power and great history of China, but we would like to see more transparency and reciprocity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. China, could you yield the floor back to the presidency?
Yes, of course, the floor is here.
Thank you. Now the chair of the Economic and Social Council has another question. You now have the floor.
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you very much for your speech. I have a question concerning the Arctic. So last year I chaired the Arctic Council and I had the feeling that I never heard of like problems concerning the Arctic. And my question is, do you think that the Arctic will be like a focusing point for diplomacy in the future, as obviously there are new paths for shipping routes and so on, and also for oil? Do you think that will be another big crisis in the future? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. We should avoid this region to become a region of crisis. And in 2007, Russia showed its national interest by implanting a flag on the ground of the Arctic Sea to show that this is Russian ground. But also China demanded to be a nation close to the Arctic. So a terminus technicus, a nation close to the Arctic. And China is investing a lot into Iceland, for example. This is not bad, but the interest to gain influence on the Arctic Sea is visible. It's also up to the European Union to be engaged. Canada, as an Arctic state, is very much engaged, but also very keen to keep the questions close to Canada, for example. Why is the Arctic so interesting? First of all, due to the climate change, within the next 10 years, more than 90% of the year, the Arctic will be ice-free, and within the next 20 years, we will have over all of the year an ice-free Arctic Sea. And this will shorten the sea lines of communications by nearly 2/3. So international transport and logistics might become much cheaper, less time consuming, and also less polluting the environment. It is also very interesting for the countries to develop and discover the resources on the ground of the Arctic. And third, the Arctic is also a great nature environment which needs to be protected against pollution, against exploitation. So we need to find, by international negotiations in time, a common sense on how to handle with the Arctic, not to exploit and to pollute it or to make it as a military exercise area. So it needs to be an open water, open seas for international trade, but also for science. And we should safeguard its treasures due to the fact that there assume to be new resources like oil, like gas, like scarce minerals and some other issues. So I see the need for a multifolded approach. Is this an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you very much. And the floor is yielded back to the presidency. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Up next, the delegation of Bulgaria also has a question, so you now have the floor.
So you mentioned some EU inclusion policies in your speech, and the delegation of Bulgaria would like to know, what do you think are some possible solutions to the current lack of unity that the European Union is currently facing in certain areas?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. Thank you. We see, for example, in how to tackle the crisis in the Middle East or the crisis between Greece and Cyprus, Greece, Cyprus and Turkey. We need, for the time being, unanimous decisions inside the European Union. Otherwise, if one country is against or is not voting for it and is voting against, there is no conclusion and there is no ability to act. And what we call Weltpolitikfähigkeit, so the ability to handle the challenges worldwide or to be able to cope with challenges, this is not given if one single member state can hamper the whole decision-making process. And therefore, we need, at least for the common foreign and security policy, a qualified majority vote, so that all member states accept to accept the majority, also if they are not part of this majority. This will take years of negotiations, because some countries see that they might be always in the minority. And therefore, the danger is that we might become a European Union of different speed, of different velocities. And this we should avoid as long as not all benefit from a European Union with different velocities. This lack of unity is pending on economic reasons, is pending on domestic problems. For example, countries like Spain with the issue of Barcelona does not vote for the independence of Kosovo, or does not acknowledge Kosovo. The same is with Bosnia or other countries who have minorities or majorities in their countries. So we need to be very careful on the diplomatic side of the European Union not to outcircle some countries. And on the other side, if we open the European Union for further member states, that we only include those countries who have no domestic conflicts. In this context, it was a mistake in 2004 to include Cyprus, for example, and also some other countries who have significant challenges inside the country, which then come up to the table in the European Union. And therefore, we shouldn't be euphoric. We should be very sober and also very focused on realpolitik, on real and sober policies and politics, not to overburden the European Union. If the European Union continues to be not able to include other opinions, the European Union will really fail. And there are some pressure groups, there are some countries who would like to see the failure of the European Union. And one success was the Brexit, which was built on wrong and false information, which changed the attitude of the whole population. And this is my plea to you, the youth in the United Kingdom was really pro-European Union, but they didn't go to the votes, to the voting stations. The elder who were against the European Union made up their mind. So please, to you, the younger generation, make up your mind and also engage. And then you can overcome this lack of unity inside the European Union.
Thank you very much. We got another question. aren't you finished?
Thank you, and yielding the floor back to the presidency.
Thank you. We got another question of the delegation of Tunisia. You now have the floor.
Thank you. I have a few questions, or the delegate of Tunisia has a few questions regarding international relationships or relations. How can you maintain relations with countries without interfering in their internal affairs? And how can we find a balance between enforcing our values and at the same time not interfering with internal affairs? Should we leave, for example, some African countries moving towards democracy, and should we leave those citizens to fight for maybe a democracy on their own, or what strategies should we follow to help move towards more democracies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. This is a key question for Western countries who believe that their system of democracy is a recipe for all the others. And that's not the case. Look to Afghanistan, look to Libya, or also look to Iraq, where Western engagement or so-called coalitions of the willing failed. They failed not in Afghanistan, but the idea to implement a Western style type or Western type of government, this failed. So first of all, in all international relations, you need to accept the cultural specificities of the other countries, their tradition and so on, with one exception. All countries in the world have signed the UN Charter for Human Rights, and all countries of the world are part of the United Nations and their acquis. This means that there is at least a basic understanding for the rights of women, rights of children, human rights, for respect and for handling criminals, for handling people of minority, against racism, for religious tolerance and so on. These are the basic rights, as well as the freedom of media, freedom of movement. And there it becomes critical. The international community has failed horribly in 1994 in Rwanda, where the massacre was. And since 1994, the nations have created a kind of recipe which is called responsibility to protect those who are under pressure, also by military means. But the willingness to do this needs a long time effort, needs the willingness to invest time, diplomacy, and if need be, also military engagement. But this is not the key. The key is crisis prevention, early warning, steps for engaged diplomacy, key leader engagement, key leader training, international pressure, sometimes also sanctions. So if Germany was to be so morale heavy as some are demanding, not to export weapons to anywhere, not to cooperate with dictators, not to accept to cooperate with non-democracies, then we could not cooperate with nearly 50% of the states worldwide. And this would be wrong. We also need to understand opponents, competitors, rivals, and the international community is also a kind of a building, a big building. Some parts of the building have another climate, but we cannot rule out the cooperation, or at least the dialogue, with rogue countries or failed states or dictatorships. We need to do that. Also that the governments listen, that they understand our thinking, and that we reach the civil society. This is of utmost importance to strengthen the civil society in the sense of that was what was accepted by the United Nations members. And so every state in the world has signed it in some part of its history. So we have to be very careful, and I believe we should really name and shame and blame those who violate tremendously these basic rights as I described them. But we cannot prescribe how they should shape their country. What we could do is how they should treat their people, fair, open-minded, that they should fight organized crime and corruption, that we should name and shame corrupt elites or corrupt governments. But we cannot change systems from the outside. Thank you. Is this an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
So yielded or yielded for?
Yes, thank you very much. We still have 2 questions left, so if you're open for 2 more questions,
Sure.
Mr. Kiesewetter, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We've got the question of, I can't still see the delegation's name, but her username is Cosima Bolinius, so you now have the floor.
Yes, I'm part of a Philippine nation, and I wanted to ask a question. So I heard that you mentioned in your speech that in countries like China and surrounding nations, certain freedoms and rights, also human rights, are deteriorating in a way compared to Europe. However, we see that former matriarchal societies, as they are more commonly found in East Asia or the area surrounding China, are leading in gender equality today, especially compared to former patriarchal nations, as they are more commonly found in Europe or America. Do you think that these nations, or at least in this regard, could benefit from some East Asian nations? For example, my nation, the Philippines, which are also very selectively sympathetic towards China, are such a former matriarchal society, and we have historically and currently a lot more women holding powerful political positions than, for example, Germany.
Yeah, that's very true. And I do not exclude that we need to change in this context. And we can learn or have to learn best practice from other countries. I had my Damascus experience when I first time headed the German delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. This was in 2010, and hence I am still the head of this delegation. And I learned from the countries from the Maghreb that they have had really balanced delegations, and the heads of the delegations were women who were much better in English than their male counterparts from their country, because they learned English via the internet during the revolution or before, because they must not leave their houses, but they had a good internet access and learned English. And they were much more capable than their male counterparts who, from their patriarchic sense or from their attitude, should lead the delegation, but they were not able to do that. And this, on the other side, influenced us to better include women into our delegations. And as we see in Africa or even at the Gulf, where women are heading the scientific think tanks, due to their capacity, to their knowledge, to their intelligence, to their ability to moderate meetings and so on, they are simply better than their male counterparts. So yes, indeed, we can learn from these countries. What we should avoid is just lip service. And what we also should look for is how true is it in the practical matter. But as far as I know, we in Germany have really underrepresented the better part of our society. We see this especially in the medical health, where the women we have 80% of the students are women because they have had better examiner in their grammar schools. But at the end, they do not pursue until the end because the climate inside of our society fosters and strengthens the male attitude, because the women, once in their life, they take care about children, they lose the contact to the agile development in their scientific area. So we need to improve the conditions for women that they are able to do both, to take care for the family and for their profession. And on the other side, men must accept that they also have to take over equally tasks in the household or for the family in general. And we should look for the best and not for those who are just available. And the best, believe me, is really the female part in a society, because in their lifetime they are much more disciplined, much more eager to learn, where the young men are driving a bicycle or motorized bicycle or hanging around. The women are learning. And we should create cultures of acceptance, that we need to accept the more eager, the more diligent people. And this might also help women to be in a better representation also in the European countries. We see this in Scandinavia or also in France, where they have a better organization for family care. And Germany is too traditionally in this context still today. And therefore, some African countries and the East Asian countries you have mentioned show how is the better way, there's best practice. Thank you for your question.
I yield the floor back to the President.
Thank you very much. One last question from the Chair of the Special Council. You now have the floor.
Yes. So first of all, I would like to thank you for your speech. I have a question concerning the Indo-Pacific region that you already talked about. You talked a lot about China in the process, and how our relation, or not our, how the Western relation with China will shape the future. I have a question concerning India, as it's also a rising power in the Indo-Pacific region, and I would like to ask you how the increasingly autocratic form of governance of Narendra Modi will shape the relations between India and the traditional Western world, which, yeah, you already explained what you mean by that.
Yeah, grateful for the question. This is really a challenge, because normally we would support a large, huge traditional democracy like India. Their democratic functions are older than those of the Federal Republic of Germany, 2 years older. Nevertheless, the ability for enterprises, or also the connectivity for science and other issues, is quite complicated due to the very bureaucratic Indian system. And now India is dividing its own population regarding the relationship between traditional Hindus and traditional Muslim. And the president there, as a Muslim, is not looking for, if I may say that, as a free parliamentarian, is not looking for a comprehensive approach for cohesion inside his country. And therefore we hope that India is, as a natural competitor also to China and other countries of the region, is trying to overcome the partition inside the country, is trying to create work for the people, and is offering less thresholds for international engagement. And India can see how it works if an autocratic system learns from capitalist countries or democratic countries as well. Look to China. India has had better preconditions in the 40s and 50s, also in the 60s, than China. And then, since the 70s, China has not only speed up, they have bypassed India in their development, and the important international enterprises are looking to China and are neglecting India. And this is wrong because in the international competition, it would weaken democracies. So India, inside its country, needs to strengthen the democracy, the democratic structures. And the difficulty of India is the system, or the Hinduic system of the separation of the different classes in the population. And it is also a question of the really challenging development in the different regions of India. So we cannot interfere in this. And I see an increasing danger of military conflicts with Pakistan and also confrontation with China. Therefore, I am hoping that in the next years, the European Union will engage in India, will make some offers to India which are acceptable, which are attractive, so that China is willing to overcome its structural deficits and speed up. Because if we lose these 1.4 billion people to a kind of dictatorship or religious wars, then we would have also a hot zone of potential conflict for the region, which will not touch Europe so far, but could inflame the Indo-Pacific and then also inflame our international relations worldwide. Thank you. Thank you for your brilliant questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Kiesewetter, for your time and your speech and your answers. We are all really grateful. We're now going to proceed with our schedule. Next up, we're going to have our digital entertainment today at 7 p.m. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. we're going to start the committee sessions via Microsoft Teams. And for the MUN directors, we're going to meet in a channel that will be opened later today. That's it. Thank you again, Mr. Kiesewetter, and welcome at OLMUN 2021.
Thank you. Goodbye. I really appreciate your conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much.